I'm Hannah Harris and I'm a final year medical student at St George's, and I've been thinking about a career in paediatrics and wanted to find out more about what it involves and how I can best get into it. So I talked to a range of paediatricians from ST1 trainees up to consultant, and this is what they said. So why did you go into paediatric training?
I have always loved working with children, and I think I knew I wanted to do paediatrics before I even went to medical school. But then at medical school, really good rotations in paediatrics, really enjoyed it, loved the variety that it offered, and I did an F1 in paediatrics to see whether I actually liked the job day to day, and I loved it, so I applied for that reason.
Kids generally get better. Although some obviously have really serious illness, and your focus is more on keeping them in school, keeping them active, enabling them to grow up, and I really liked the idea of that rather than dealing with elderly people who don't get better and have loads of really awful problems that you can't fix.
What do you enjoy the most?
I think it's the variety, which I think is really rare to find in medical specialties nowadays, and certainly adults seem to have specialised much more quickly than we do. So it is a really general specialty, and I really love that mix, that you never quite know what's going to happen. One minute you can be dealing with teenagers and their social problems, and the next minute you're dealing with a very small, very sick baby. You do your own intensive care. So there's such a huge variety. But I also just felt I'd found my niche in terms of the people that are already in the specialty. So it's a nice specialty to work in. People are generally nice. People generally want the best for their patients. And, generally it's a lovely team to work in.
I think there's pretty much everything I really like about paediatrics as the thing to do. The big things are that, first of all, children basically get better. So we're into cure, or the disease goes away. So even really bad things like many of our cancers actually are now cured. You can't really say that about many adult cancers. Adult disease is dominated by degeneration and just getting old, whereas paediatric disease isn't. There's very, very few degenerative disease we see.
So I think one of the things I really enjoy is the kind of team approach and working with other paediatricians and other child health practitioners, and particularly with the more complex children, it's not all about the disease, and there's kind of a real need to work together with people, and I really like that kind of working together and being part of a team.
I think probably as a consultant I enjoy having fun on the ward rounds, so the ward rounds are not too serious and you can go off on tangents and talk about Lego and what someone's had for dinner, or just talk about random things, because if you can't kind of talk to the child and interact with them, there's no way they're going to let you examine them. So it's just quite fun because it means it breaks up the ward round a little bit rather than it all being the same every day.
Do you remember when I saw you earlier and I said to you about these little stickies? You're just going to put these on your chest, all right? Just a bit like traffic lights, aren't they?
What challenges have you faced in your career?
Well, I guess there's the really obvious ones in paediatrics that actually, whilst bad things don't happen very often, when they do, they tend to be quite difficult. And I think when you're quite junior, when you're quite young, it's quite difficult to deal with children dying, for example, and that's something that you have to learn to come to terms with.
It can be really tough being a paediatric registrar, because you have an awful lot of responsibility, but also because along with that responsibility comes an awful lot of legwork, and you're up in the middle of the night, you're seeing children with colds in A&E, you're putting in cannulas, and that can be really frustrating when actually you've been a trainee for a long time. However, at the same time as doing those kind of really mundane things, you're also dealing with incredibly complex decisions, around safeguarding children, around whether to discharge children with a fever, dealing with a busy workload in winter, prioritising demand.
I think the challenges are probably the same as the challenges everyone has, that you're kind of trying to combine your work life and your home life, or your family life. So I think probably over the whole course of your career, most of your challenges have been around trying to combine work and home. I guess the thing in paediatrics, or the advantage of paediatrics, is that from a Royal College of Paediatrics perspective, they're much more clued up about job sharing or working part-time or having time out for maternity leave. So I think just because the vast majority of the trainees at some point will have time off because a lot of them are women, that actually they've had to work out how that can work for trainees.
I think there's the practical things as well. As it's a broad specialty, there's a lot to learn, and that's one of the joys of it. But at the same time, you always feel there's so much more that you could know, that I always feel like I should be reading a bit more than they probably do. So there's that challenge in terms of the academic, keeping up to date. And I guess there's the practical difficulties as well, that, we're doing procedures often on very young babies, and you've really got to keep your practical skills really up to scratch. And again, that's actually quite a nice challenge, but sometimes that can be quite difficult, particularly when you've got parents that are very anxious in a very stressful time in their lives.
Parents can be challenging, but it's also really satisfying helping a parent understand about their child and, kind of helping children come to terms with what's going on in their life or develop ways around an illness. And there's that kind of real sense of working together with parents, with children, with other practitioners, and I really enjoy that.
What does paediatric training involve?
So after you've completed your foundation training, then at the moment Paediatrics is a run-through training programme, which means that you go into it as an ST1 and you come out the other end as an ST8 with a CCT, a completion of training. That may change in the future. It's a bit difficult to know in the current climate. You can do some paediatrics as a foundation trainee for sort of 3 or 4 months, and there are some programmes. And there's also a lot of programmes with general practice, and I'd thoroughly recommend that because 40% of general practice is children, so you get some good experience there. But once you decide you're going to go for a paediatric training programme, you basically competitively apply and you enter at ST1. You'll spend 3 years, so ST1 to ST3, as a kind of an SHO, and you'll get lots of experience in general paediatrics, but you'll also get some experience in neonatology, and you may get some experience in community paediatrics or one of the paediatric subspecialties, but always some general peds and always some neonates. And then ST4 and 5, your first 2 years of registrar training, are fairly structured to make sure that you get a year of general paediatrics, usually in a DGH, 6 months of neonates, usually in a kind of bigger hospital with some quite sick neonates, and then 6 months of community paediatrics, and that's considered your sort of core registrar training. And then your final 3 years as a registrar really depend on what you want to do ultimately. So most people will spend a year doing a little bit of subspecialty stuff, maybe in a kind of children's hospital, and then you either competitively apply again for a national programme of subspecialty training, or you stay within your home region and you do general paediatrics with little bits of subspecialty here and there depending on your interest.
And then at the end of that you have this thing called START, which is a kind of assessment of your readiness to be a consultant. It's not a summative process, but it's an important thing to do, and so there's time to complete your training as a trainee before you're actually ready to take a consultant post. Now then you've got your CCT, you look for a consultant job, your training continues at that stage, and that's the great thing about paediatrics. There's still loads of stuff to learn because it's so general, because it's so wide. You're always seeing things that you've never seen before or trying to work out what to do. And so there's rarely a day goes past where I don't learn something new or need to access a new piece of information.
And what can I do now to maximise my chances of being accepted onto a training programme?
I think in paediatrics we're really looking for kind of interested, motivated people who, genuinely kind of have a love of working with children and families, but who also have common sense and are going to apply that to the profession.
I think you should try and get as much exposure to all the different elements of paediatrics as possible. Think about applying for a F1, F2 posts that have got paediatrics in as a rotation. That would be really useful. Speak to your educational supervisor about getting involved in a taster week, and maybe try and get involved in other ways with audits or projects. That can be either with the paediatric department directly, and again your educational supervisor would be a really good person to put you in touch with the paediatric consultants and just explain that you're keen. But also you could do projects and audits through the pharmacy or through A&E, and they usually have projects that run every year that you could get involved in.
Well, I'd say show some interest in paediatrics. Don't be gutted if you don't get a paediatrics job for foundation years, because actually it's totally accepted that lots of people won't get a paediatrics job in their foundation years that want to do paediatrics, and that's fine, because actually children pop up everywhere. So general practice, 25% of all their consultations are with children, so try to maximise your opportunities. Surgery, see lots of children, orthopaedics do, A&E do, so wherever you're going to be you will almost certainly see some children in your foundation years, but try and maximise your learning out of those. And I think paediatrics needs a really wide range of skills, so showing aptitude at things like communication skills, really critically important in paediatrics.
Get to know the teams where you do your placements. Don't ever be afraid of asking people what they do, what they're interested in, what they've got on at the moment. If students approach me and they tell me they're, interested in something, then I'm doing something in that area, I'll get them involved. It doesn't have to be formal, you can help me carry out a small piece of research, you can help me design an educational programme, I might get you doing audit. So, students who are interested, keen and willing to go up to people and say that they're interested in paediatrics and can they get involved, we will always welcome.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Just gets done, doesn't it? That's a clever girl. There we are.
Thank you to everyone who talked to me about a career in paediatrics. So I found out that it's a very varied career in terms of age and in terms of subspecialisation. I also found out that there are lots of academic and research opportunities, and although the hours sound difficult, it sounds like the team is really supportive and ultimately the job is really rewarding. It turns out that there's lots I can do now in order to prepare for my career. I can do audits, I could do a taster week even if I don't get a job as an F1 in paediatrics, and I can't wait to get started.